Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is the US Futures Weekly Chart Analysis for the week ending 8th of November 2024. It's been a bit of an eventful week this week, the US elections especially, and also a Fed decision on the cash rate target. That's left the market with some whipsawing, which you'll see in some of the associated charts. We're starting with the US dollar index futures as normal. This is the wider view. You can see the market's moved sideways for a considerable period of time now. If we zoom in, the market pushed higher this week. Let's put some lines in quickly. That's where we were last week. You see the market pulled back, then pushed higher. I've been anticipating some supply would be drawn out from the left here. Highs of the range come through here. Prices pushed up into that level. It did close a little off its high for the week on pretty good volume, above average volume. So there was some supply drawn out, but the market was strong enough to absorb that supply. If we just quickly have a look at the daily chart to see what the market actually did during this week's bar, you'll see the market came back initially and then accelerated higher. Since then, the market pulled back within this bar's range on reduced volume and then recovered some lost ground. This is a period of consolidation in here. This is the market accelerating higher and then attempting to consolidate above the recent highs. So this market looks like it's making a pretty serious attempt to consolidate up at these new highs. It doesn't look like the market is going to be knocked down easily. So where I expected some supply to be drawn out in here, the market is making a pretty good attempt to consolidate at this level. Let's have a look at some of the other charts. E-mini S&P, this is S&P 500 index futures. You can see this market has accelerated higher this week on reduced and below average volume. That suggests that selling pressure was quite low in the market this week. Price pulled back over the previous 2 weeks and then accelerated higher and up to new highs. This was a pretty strong move. You would likely expect some consolidation in response, at least some intra-week or early in the week consolidation before there's any attempt to accelerate higher. I will say, though, that volume being relatively low suggests that there isn't a great deal of supply being drawn out, at least at this point in time, and that suggests that there may not be a great deal of consolidation required. But we'll just keep our eyes open and see how it trades early in the week. US Treasury 10-year note futures are attempting to consolidate in here. The market pushed up to new highs up here, broke down on this bar. Here's where the market attempted to consolidate in there. That failed and price continued lower. And now this week there's been a reasonable attempt to support the market again. Volume, while it was slightly reduced, remained above the average, but this time price pulled back and then recovered to close back in this range. There's been an attempt to support this market, and you would expect either an up bar in response or a little test for supply. So we'll see how that goes. Copper price futures. Copper price futures were consolidating previously in response to this push higher. You've got a real whipsaw bar here. The best way to deal with these bars, if you're uncertain as to what's happened, is to look inside these bars. So if we go to the daily chart, and you can look inside this bar and see what actually happened. You can see the market initially pushed higher this week. It's pulled back pretty sharply, made a good recovery, and then on Friday, a much narrower spread bar on reduced volume. I tend to feel that this market has had an opportunistic attempt to accumulate. It pulled back really sharply here, only to almost recover all of the lost ground the following day, and then it's pulled back, but only modestly on reduced volume. This looks suspiciously like an attempt to accumulate in here. We'll have to see how it responds, because that'll tell us what the answer really is. But at this point, it looks like it's been opportunistically rammed lower, only to buy it back in buy the offer style. So we'll see how that turns out. You can see how bars like this can be a little confusing to read initially, at least until you get some response to help push you in the right direction. So this bar actually looks weak. It looks like it's pushed higher and closed poorly, and this market would likely move lower like this. But after looking inside the bar, it does look more like there's been an opportunistic attempt to accumulate. So let's just see how it plays out. That'll push us in the right direction. Gold price futures. Gold price futures did pull back this week. They probably needed to after it was pretty likely supply was drawn out on this bar. Prices pulled back perhaps a little more deeply than I anticipated, but it's pulled back no doubt, which it needed to do. You can see with the volume being increased and well above the average, that probably more supply has been drawn out than may have been anticipated. This may even prove to be like a little mini shakeout. Perhaps you'll get a reversal bar in response. We'll see. But at this point, price has pulled back in response to the weakness that was drawn out in this bar. It's exactly what was probably required in this market, a bit of a pullback, and you might find that there's either a sharp recovery, depending on economic conditions, or there's a bit of a consolidation sideways for a period, whether that be a week or two. Silver price futures. Silver price futures also pulled back in response to this weakness that was seen up here on this increased volume. Here's the highs of the range. You can see the market has pulled back to the safety usually found below the breakout line, and that would probably allow this market to find some support back in here, and that may offer a springboard to push higher in response. But the market is certainly going to consolidate first. Now, whether that just takes a day or two or a bit longer, we'll have to wait and see. You almost certainly see a bit of consolidation in here prior to any serious push higher. Like crude price futures pushed higher and then pulled back to close poorly. Perhaps this is a chart where we should look inside that last weekly bar as well. It's always a handy thing to do if you're uncertain as to what's happened in a longer term bar. Just look inside. So you had 2 days where the markets moved higher. There was an attempt to shake out here. This was an inability to rally. The market's attempted to push higher and it's been unable to do so. And then the market's pulled back in response. When it's pulled back, it hasn't found reduced volume or reduced supply. The supply has been pretty much the same. So there's certainly some weakness in these last 2 bars. Supply has been drawn out of the market. So if we go back to the weekly chart again now, supply has been drawn out on this bar. And this increased volume, it's about average volume, fraction below average, but we'll call that average. It's close enough to it. Supply has been drawn out. So at best, you'll see the market pull back and test for supply. Otherwise, you may see a little down bar of some description in response. Euro US dollar currency futures. And this bar has also done a really big whipsaw. If we look at the daily chart, see what's happened. Price initially pushed higher, pulled back really sharply. There was a fairly weak recovery in response, and prices pulled back a second time. And importantly, the close is below the initial pullback bar's close. So it's a weaker close for the week. The market's moved lower. So I would suggest that supply's been drawn out. There's only a weak attempt to recover, and this market continues to look relatively weak. It has been relatively weak previously. We've noted it over recent weeks. The market's really pushed lower here. The recovery was weak, closed well off its high. There's been an attempt to rally. The prices pushed lower and made a new low. So that's not a particularly strong bar whatsoever. Weakness has emerged, and the market's really going to probably come down and test this level almost certainly. British pound currency futures have been far more resilient than the euro. If we actually have a look inside that bar as well, you'll see the difference. Here's those two initial bars higher. The pullback only came back to the recent lows and didn't establish new lows. The recovery was somewhat stronger than the euro. There was still supply being drawn out here, no doubt, but the recovery was somewhat stronger, and the pullback in response did find reduced volume, where the volume continued to be high on the euro, and the close is above the initial pullback's close. So that's a little stronger as well. You'll also note that these two bars are within the range of that down bar and above its close. So this market is relatively stronger, no doubt, than the euro and continues to trade that way. And you'll also note that over recent weeks, there's been a reluctance to move lower here. The euro is much lower, and this market is reluctant to move lower. It is moving lower. The US dollar is moving higher. That puts this market under pressure. It's just reluctant to do so. It doesn't want to move lower, and it's trying to resist moving lower as best it can within a weaker market. Japanese yen currency futures. Here's the daily chart. There was an attempt to push high here, although it wasn't particularly strong. Price pulled back and below the recent lows. There was a recovery in response. This last bar with a narrow spread and very low volume, that's a weak bar there. There was no support for higher prices here. I'd suggest there's been an attempt to support this market. If we go back to the weekly chart, you can see the market has broken down previously. It has been reluctant to move lower here. It did make new lows, but then recovered. The best you can say is there's been an attempt to support this market. I'm not sure it'll be successful here. There's a lot of supply that's been drawn out in the highs of this bar to force almost a mid-bar close. So there is supply in the market. There's an attempt to support the market. I'm not sure if it'll be successful. Aussie dollar currency futures. We might as well keep the trend going and look inside once again. Similar to the other currencies, price moved higher. You can see how much stronger than the yen that was. The yen was down here on the second bar. This bar made a clear new high up here. There was a pullback in response, and the market recovered during that period up to here. And overall, over 2 days, there was a strong recovery and a modest pullback. There's a pretty strong attempt to support the market in here. This was a pretty good recovery over 2 bars, and the market's only pulled back to the mid-range of that 2-bar rise. And you can also see that price rejected moving below the previous lows and remains above that level. So that's a pretty good effort facing the strength of the US dollar, which is making this market weak. That's a pretty good effort overall. We go back to the weekly chart again. While there is weakness in this market, there's no doubt, the market is making a pretty good attempt to hold on at the lows of the range down here. So that was a pretty good effort overall. Bitcoin futures continued to push higher this week and have broken out to new all-time highs. Here's the lows of the initial range and then the secondary range down here. And after a period of consolidation, price did push higher and above this level. The market then consolidated for 2 weeks, pushed higher again, 1 week testing for supply. You'll note down here that supply was found to be quite high, but the narrow spread suggests the market made a good attempt to absorb that supply. And in response, price popped up higher on low volume. This was an absorption bar, almost certainly, and price moved higher in response this week. In fact, that bar there looks a lot like that bar on the Euro chart in here. Here's the absorption bar, and here's the push higher in response over 2 weeks. So you may see something like that in this market. Here was the highs of the range, there was the absorption bar, and there was the push higher in response. So you've had pretty good breakout bar there, well above the recent highs of the range. You would normally see a consolidation in response, whether that just be for a day or so prior to any attempt to push higher, or whether that actually be for an extended period because supply is drawn out. This market is generally really strong when it makes a breakout, so I won't be surprised to see a second week of an attempt to push higher before there is any serious consolidation in response. Okay, back to the US dollar index futures just quickly. You can see that the market has pushed above the highs of this little range in here and is in where there's supply expected to be found above. There's been a pretty good attempt to push higher here. There has been some supply drawn out, but the market is attempting to absorb that supply. So there may be a minor pullback early in the week, perhaps like this. And then depending on how much supply is drawn out, you'll get a push higher in response or a continued push lower if overwhelming supply is drawn out. So the market's making a pretty good attempt to absorb the supply being drawn out as it pushes above this important level here. Okay, thanks for your time. See you again next week. See ya.